The housekeeper has been taking care of the mansion for 10 years, but when the boss's son returns from abroad, everything changes. The creak of the iron gate announced the arrival that Regina Thompson had been dreading for months. From the library window on the second floor, she watched the black Porsche cutting through the long avenue of centuries-old oaks that led to the Westbrook mansion. Her fingers unconsciously squeezed the cleaning cloth she held, smearing it with furniture wax. "So he's really back," she muttered to herself, as she instinctively straightened her gray bun. For 10 years, Regina had been more than just the housekeeper at the Westbrook estate in Bedford, New York. She was the guardian of an heirloom, the protector of every piece of Chippendale furniture, every French tapestry, every piece of English china that told the story of 5 generations. The car's engine fell silent, and Regina took a deep breath before descending the carved oak stairs. Her soft-soled shoes barely made a sound on the steps, a habit acquired in years of discreet service. At the main entrance, she found Charles, the 70-year-old butler, already positioned with his usual impeccable posture. "He's arrived earlier than expected," Charles commented, his low voice carrying a note of apprehension that only Regina could notice after so many years of living together. Before she could reply, the heavy mahogany door opened and Michael Westbrook entered like a gust of wind on a calm day. At 32, he was the modernized image of his father. The same piercing blue eyes, the same defined jaw, but with an air of irreverence that had never existed in Alexander Westbrook. "Regina, Charles, long time no see," Michael exclaimed, dropping his designer suitcases on the marble floor with a thud that made Regina wince internally. "London sends its regards, although I doubt this mausoleum will have missed me." Regina kept her professional smile, the one she had perfected over decades of service. "Welcome back, Mr. Westbrook. Your room is ready, just as dash. How was it when I left?" "I hope not," Michael interrupted her, spinning on his heels to take in the atmosphere of the entrance hall. "We need to bring this house into the 21st century. It's past time for some changes around here." Regina's heart skipped a beat. She had been dreading exactly this ever since she had received the news of Michael's return after Alexander's death. For the past decade, she had preserved every detail of Westbrook Manor, not just out of duty, but out of love for the history those walls held. "Sir," Charles snorted, "perhaps you'd like to rest from your trip first. Mrs. Thompson has prepared a light dash." "There's no time for rest, Charles," Michael declared, already climbing the stairs every 2 steps. "I have a video call with interior designers in half an hour. We're going to transform this place into something that really reflects the future of the Westbrooks." Regina and Charles exchanged worried glances. In recent weeks, since the announcement of Michael's return, they had discussed in whispers what his return would mean for the mansion. Now, their worries seemed terribly justified. Following Michael up the stairs, Regina noticed the subtle changes in his posture as he passed the family portraits. Her gaze lingered briefly on the painting of his mother, Caroline, who died when he was just 12. It was the only moment when his step faltered. In the hallway on the second floor, Michael stopped abruptly in front of his father's old office. "The keys, Regina?" "Sir, your father always kept this room dash, the keys," he repeated, this time without the previous joviality in his voice. Reluctantly, Regina took the bunch of keys out of her pocket. Her hands shook slightly as she selected the antique brass key that opened that particular door. Alexander Westbrook's office had remained untouched since his death 3 months ago. When the door opened, the familiar scent of leather, old books, and brandy filled the air. Michael entered first, his determined steps contrasting with the reverence that this space had always inspired. Regina stood on the threshold, watching as he circled the room, running his fingers through the leather-bound volumes of his father's private library. "All this," he gestured broadly, "needs to change. I'm going to turn this space into my home office. Monitors, workstations, all the technology needed to run the family business in the 21st century." Regina felt as if something cold slid down her spine. "Mr. Westbrook, your father personally cataloged each of these books. Some are first editions dash, and they will remain first editions in some university library that will know how to appreciate them properly." Michael interrupted her, already typing on his cell phone. "Regina, I know that you and my father had a particular vision of how things should be kept here. But times have changed. Westbrook Manor needs to adapt. At that moment, Regina realized that her real battle was just beginning. It wasn't just a question of preserving old furniture or maintaining established routines. It was about protecting the essence of what the Westbrooks stood for, a history she had sworn to guard. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, stepping back into the hallway. In her room, on the top floor of the staff wing, there was a box of letters. Letters that Alexander Westbrook had entrusted to her before his death, along with specific instructions on when they should be delivered. Perhaps it was time to reveal some of the secrets the mansion held. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Regina could hear Michael's excited voice on the phone, already planning transformations that would make Alexander Westbrook turn over in his grave. But she knew something that the young heir had yet to discover. The walls of the Westbrook mansion held secrets much deeper than just family history, and some of these secrets had the power to change everything. Regina waited until nightfall, when the mansion plunged into its usual nocturnal silence, to go up to the attic. The creak of the wooden staircase beneath her feet seemed louder than ever, echoing her footsteps as she climbed with a flashlight in hand. The box of letters wasn't the only secret that Alexander Westbrook had entrusted to her before he died. In the dusty attic, among trunks covered in white sheets and furniture from bygone eras, Regina made her way to an old Victorian cupboard. With deft fingers, she pressed a specific sequence of notches into the wood, revealing a secret compartment. From inside, she pulled out a diary bound in faded red leather. "Forgive me, Alexander," she whispered, opening the diary for the first time in 10 years. The yellowed pages contained not only the most intimate thoughts of the Westbrook patriarch, but also revelations that could shake the foundations of the family. A noise downstairs made her freeze. Footsteps were approaching from the main staircase. "Regina," Michael's voice echoed. "Are you up there?" She quickly stowed the diary in her pocket and started down the attic stairs. "Yes, sir. Just checking some old boxes." Michael was standing in the hallway, still dressed in his Italian suit. Even at that time of night, "I need to discuss some immediate changes. Tomorrow a team of designers will arrive to start the modernization process." Regina felt the weight of the diary in her pocket like lead. "Sir, perhaps we should consider a more gradual approach. There's a lot of historical value dash. The historical value is holding us back." Michael interrupted her, his voice firm, but not unkind. "Regina, I know you care about this house, but we need to think about the future. The family business requires a modern base of operations." As she followed him into Alexander's office, Regina noticed that Michael had already removed some of the books from the shelves. Piles of old volumes were organized on the floor, ready to be taken away. "I found something interesting today," Michael commented, taking a yellowed envelope from inside the desk drawer. "It seems that my father was involved in some projects that I was completely unaware of. Did you know about his investments in sustainable technology?" Regina hesitated. That was just one of the many secrets Alexander had shared with her over the years. "Your father was a very private man when it came to business, sir." "Too secretive, apparently," Michael muttered, studying the documents. "There are records here of meetings with solar energy companies, feasibility studies to convert part of the estate's land. Why has he never mentioned this in our conversations?" The moment seemed appropriate. Regina touched the diary in her pocket. "Mr. Westbrook, there's something I need to show you." "Your father entrusted it to me." And knock on the door interrupted her. Charles entered with a worried expression. "Forgive the intrusion, but there's an urgent call for you from Miss Lauren Mitchell." Michael's face changed instantly. "Lauren? She shouldn't be calling me." Regina noted the sudden tension in his shoulders. Lauren Mitchell was a name she knew well. Michael's ex-fiancée, whose turbulent breakup had been one of the reasons for his departure for London 3 years ago. "Tell her I'm busy," Michael ordered, turning his attention back to the documents. "She mentioned something about the merger documents, sir," Charles added cautiously. Michael cursed softly. "I'll take this in my room. Regina, we'll continue this conversation tomorrow." After he left, Regina remained in the office, looking at the piles of books on the floor. Charles approached silently. "Are you going to tell him?" the butler asked, his eyes fixed on the pocket where she kept the diary. "I'm not sure yet," Regina admitted. Alexander asked me to wait for the right moment. With all these changes happening so quickly, Charles nodded understandingly. The secrets of this house are like its foundations, Regina. Removing them too quickly could bring the whole thing crashing down. Regina walked over to the window, watching the garden lights reflecting in the ancient fountains. The Westbrook mansion had withstood wars, economic depressions, and family tragedies. But the changes Michael was planning weren't just physical. They threatened the very essence of the legacy she had sworn to protect. Upstairs, she could hear Michael's muffled voice, probably arguing with Lauren. His return had brought more than just modernization plans. It had brought back ghosts that the mansion had tried to bury for years. Regina took the diary out of her pocket and stroked its worn cover. Inside those pages was the true story of the Westbrooks, including revelations about the death of Caroline, Michael's mother, that could completely change the way he saw his father and the mansion itself. Tomorrow, she decided, putting the diary away again. After the designers arrive, he needs to understand what's really at stake before he starts dismantling decades of history. Charles just nodded, realizing that some secrets needed to choose their own moment to come to light. As they both left the office, the shadows of the night seemed to grow thicker, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for the dawn that could change the fate of the Westbrooks forever. The next morning, Regina found Michael already awake in the kitchen, his fingers drumming impatiently on the marble countertop as he consulted his tablet. The clock was barely 6 o'clock, but he was already dressed in an impeccable suit, as if he were ready for a board meeting. "The designers will arrive in an hour," he announced without raising his eyes. "I want you and Charles to be available to show them every room in the house." Regina poured him a cup of coffee, a habit her body had been doing automatically for years. "Before that, Mr. Westbrook, there's something we need to discuss." Alexander's diary weighed on his apron like an anchor. Michael finally looked up, and for a moment, Regina saw in him the 12-year-old boy who used to hide in the kitchen after Caroline's death. "Lauren's call yesterday," Regina began cautiously, "made me think that maybe it's time to share some of the things your father entrusted to me." Michael stiffened visibly. "Regina, if this is about the merger between the Mitchell Companies and Westbrook Industries it's about your mother," she interrupted him, something she rarely did. "And about the real reasons why your father started investing in sustainable energy." The silence that followed was as thick as fog. Regina removed the diary from her apron and placed it on the worktop. Michael looked at it as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Caroline didn't die in a car accident, as you always believed," Regina continued, her voice soft but firm. "She was investigating a series of environmental irregularities at one of the family's old factories." Michael's hands trembled slightly as he touched the diary. "What are you talking about? Your mother was a passionate environmentalist, way ahead of her time. She discovered that one of the Westbrook factories was dumping toxic waste into a local reservoir. When she threatened to expose the situation, there were consequences." Michael opened the diary, his eyes running down the pages written in his father's elegant handwriting. Regina could see the exact moment he found the entry about Caroline's death. His pupils dilated, and all color left his face. "The weight of this guilt will consume me forever," he read aloud. "I could not protect Caroline from our own greed. Her accident was orchestrated by the council, and my cowardice in not opposing them cost the life of the only woman I ever loved." The sound of cars approaching down the boulevard broke the moment. The designers had arrived earlier. "Why are you showing me this now?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Because your rush to modernize everything, to erase the past, is exactly what your father feared," Regina explained. "In the last years of his life, Alexander dedicated himself to transforming the Westbrook legacy. The investments in clean energy, the preservation of this mansion, it was all part of his redemption." Charles appeared in the kitchen doorway. "The designers have arrived, sir." Michael remained motionless, his hands still on the journal. Regina could see the gears turning in his mind, decades of understanding being rewritten in minutes. "Cancel the appointment with the designers," he ordered suddenly. "Tell them a family emergency has arisen." After Charles left, Michael turned to Regina. "What other secrets does this house hold? What else has my father kept from me?" Regina thought about the letters kept in his room, the unread pages of his diary, the documents hidden in the secret compartment in the attic. Your father spent the last few years of his life trying to right the wrongs of the past. This mansion isn't just a relic to be preserved, it's a testament to transformation. Lauren, Michael muttered, realizing something. She wasn't calling about the merger yesterday, was she? She found out something about the company's past. Regina nodded. Her ex-fiancé works for an environmental organization now. She found documents linking the old factory to the ecological disaster your mother tried to expose. Michael closed the diary carefully, as if he feared its pages might disintegrate. I need to see everything, Regina. Every letter, every document my father left. I need to understand. There's one more thing you should know, Regina said, pulling a folded envelope from her pocket. Your mother wrote this for you the night before she died. Alexander never had the courage to hand it over. Michael's hands trembled as he took the envelope. The wax seal with the Westburg coat of arms was still intact, preserving Caroline's last words for 2 decades. The morning sun was beginning to bathe the kitchen, its golden rays dancing across the marble like promises of a new day. Regina watched as Michael carefully tucked the envelope and diary into his inside jacket pocket. Nothing will be demolished or modernized until I fully understand our history, he declared, his voice carrying a new determination. Will you help me unravel it all, Regina? That's what I'm here for, she replied simply, knowing that Michael Westbert's real journey was just beginning. Michael spent the morning locked in his father's study, immersed in the pages of his diary. Regina kept busy with her usual tasks, but her thoughts kept returning to the young heir and the truths he was discovering. Around midday, Charles knocked softly on her door. Lauren Mitchell was at the gate. The butler informed him in a low voice. She insists on speaking to Mr. Westbrook. Regina sighed, already anticipating the imminent confrontation. I'll let Michael know. In the study, she found Michael sitting in his father's leather armchair, his diary open on his lap and his mother's unopened letter on the desk. His features seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few hours. Lauren's here, Regina announced softly. Michael raised his eyes, and there was a determination in them that was very reminiscent of Alexander. Send her in. It's time to face a few more ghosts. Minutes later, Lauren Mitchell walked through the office with the same striking presence that Regina remembered. At 30, she had swapped the corporate world for environmental activism, a transformation that now made a lot more sense. You didn't return my calls, Lauren said flatly, stopping in front of the desk. I was busy discovering that my whole life has been built on lies, Michael replied, lifting the diary. But you already knew that, didn't you? Lauren hesitated, her eyes meeting Regina's briefly. I found out about your mother 6 months ago. That's why I called off our engagement and started investigating the former operations of Westbrook Industries. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's voice shook slightly. Because you weren't ready to listen, Lauren replied, sitting down in the chair opposite him. You were so determined to follow in your father's footsteps, to modernize everything without looking to the past. You had to find out for yourself. Regina moved silently to leave, but Michael stopped her. Stay, Regina. You're as much a part of this story as any of us. Lauren opened her briefcase, spreading documents out on the desk. Over the last few months, I've managed to trace a pattern of concealment that stretches back decades. The factory your mother was investigating was just the tip of the iceberg. Alexander tried to correct his mistakes, Regina interjected softly. The investments in clean energy, the donations to environmental causes, but he never exposed the truth, Lauren added. There was never any justice for Caroline. Michael picked up his mother's letter, still sealed. Maybe it's time to change that. With trembling fingers, he broke the wax seal. Caroline Westbert's voice, preserved in ink on paper for 20 years, filled the silence of the office through the words read by her son. My dear Michael, if you are reading this, it means that my suspicions were correct. I can no longer pretend not to see what our family has done. Money and power have corrupted us, but you, my son, still have the chance to choose a different path. I've discovered documents that prove decades of environmental neglect. Lives have been destroyed, entire communities affected. Tomorrow I intend to take everything public. Your father begs me to reconsider, says he'll find a less drastic solution. But we've already spent too long hiding the truth. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that the Westbrook's true legacy isn't in mansions or bank accounts. It's in the ability to recognize our mistakes and work to correct them. With all my love, Mom, the silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of birds in the garden. Michael folded the letter carefully, his hands still shaking. What exactly did you discover in your investigations? He asked Lauren. Enough evidence for a federal prosecution, she replied. But I also discovered something more recent. The company that's interested in merging with Westbrook Industries, they have a similar history of environmental violations. Michael stood up, walking over to the window. The garden below, meticulously maintained by Regina for years, seemed a symbol of everything that needed to be preserved and protected. Regina, he called out without turning around. Those documents in the attic you mentioned, I need to see them now. There are more than documents up there, Regina revealed. Your mother kept a complete archive of her investigations. Alexander never had the courage to destroy. Lauren approached Michael, touching his arm hesitantly. It's not too late to do the right thing. He turned, facing the two women who, each in their own way, held the truths of his family. I'm not just going to do the right thing. I'm going to turn the Westbrook legacy into something my mother would be proud of. Regina felt a wave of emotion as she recognized in her words echoes of both Caroline and Alexander, the determination of one and the capacity for transformation of the other. Where do we start? Lauren asked, a soft smile appearing on her lips. At the beginning, Michael replied, his voice firm. Regina, we're going to need coffee. It's going to be a long night. As Regina headed for the kitchen, she could hear Michael and Lauren beginning to discuss strategy. The Westbrook mansion, which had held dark secrets for so long, seemed lighter somehow, as if the truths finally coming out would allow her to breathe again. Charles was waiting for her in the kitchen, already preparing a tray of coffee. Things are going to change around here, aren't they? Yes, Regina replied, a genuine smile appearing on her face. But this time, for the better. Dawn found Michael, Lauren, and Regina still in the office, surrounded by piles of documents they had retrieved from the attic. The empty coffee cups and scattered papers told the story of a sleepless night spent unearthing 2 decades of secrets. This is worse than we imagined, Lauren muttered, running her fingers through a worn folder. Caroline wasn't just investigating one factory. She discovered a systematic pattern of contamination in 3 different states. Michael nodded gravely, his tired red eyes fixed on a map marked out in his mother's meticulous handwriting. Red circles identified sites of illegal dumping of toxic waste, forming a sinister web of environmental destruction. Regina, he called out suddenly, you mentioned that my father had started environmental recovery projects in recent years. Where are these documents? Regina turned to a filing cabinet in the corner of the office, her knowledge of Alexander's organization proving invaluable. He kept everything separated by region. The most recent projects were focused on Bedford and the surrounding areas. As she searched for the relevant folders, an urgent knock on the door interrupted her work. Charles entered, his normally impassive expression betraying concern. Sir, there are representatives of the Westbrook Industries board at the main gate. They demand an immediate meeting. Lauren stood up abruptly. They know. Someone must have leaked information about our investigation. How much time do we have? Michael asked, already starting to organize the most crucial documents. 5 minutes tops, Charles replied. They seem determined. Regina moved with practiced efficiency. The secret compartment in the attic. We can hide everything there until we decide our next move. Michael hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. Lauren, you need to go out the back. If they see you here, I'm not going to let you face this alone, she protested, but Michael was already shoving the most important folders into her hands. You're our best chance of exposing everything legally. Take these documents to your office and keep them safe. He turned to Regina. Do you know what to do with the rest? Regina nodded, already methodically sorting the papers into piles. Charles began to help her, his movements as precise and silent as ever. As Lauren slipped out of the back door, Michael adjusted his tie and tried to look as if he hadn't spent the whole evening digging up his family's sins. Regina watched the transformation. In seconds, he was back to being the polished businessman who had arrived at the mansion days ago. "Regina," he called out before going downstairs to welcome the visitors. "My mother trusted you. So did my father. Now I understand why." The sound of cars parking at the front entrance echoed through the mansion. Regina could hear male voices, authoritative tones reminiscent of old council meetings when Alexander was still alive. "I'll distract you in the library," Michael continued. "You have 20 minutes to put everything away." As soon as he left, Regina and Charles began their race against time. The secret compartment in the attic, which for years had held only Alexander's diary, would now hold many more secrets. "The oldest files first," Regina instructed as they climbed the stairs. "Anything with Caroline's signature on it needs to be specially protected." Working in perfect synchronicity, they organized the documents methodically. Through the walls, they could hear the distant murmur of voices from the library. Michael, keeping the council busy while they protected the evidence that could finally bring justice. "Last folder," Charles announced, just as footsteps began to echo in the downstairs corridor. Regina closed the secret compartment carefully, making sure that no trace of its existence was visible. The footsteps were approaching the attic stairs. "Miss Thompson," a male voice called out, "Mr. Westbrook requests your presence in the library." "Just a moment," she replied, exchanging a meaningful glance with Charles. "Just finishing organizing some old boxes." Descending the attic stairs, Regina found one of the board members waiting. Harrison Powell, one of Westbrook Industries' longest-serving executives. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fascinating how you keep this house running after so many years," he commented as he escorted her into the library. "Alexander always said you were the heart of this mansion." "Just doing my duty, Mr. Powell." In the library, Michael was surrounded by 5 other board members. His face remained impassive, but Regina knew the subtle signs of tension in his posture. "Ah, Regina," Michael greeted her with a forced smile. "These gentlemen have some questions about my father's latest projects. Apparently, there have been some unauthorized investments that need to be clarified." Regina kept her expression neutral, decades of discreet service serving her well at that moment. "I'll be happy to help in any way I can, gentlemen." As she answered the council's increasingly incisive questions, Regina thought of the documents, now safe in the attic, the truths Caroline had died trying to reveal, and the son who was finally ready to continue his fight. Westbrook Manor had kept its secrets long enough. Now it was time to let the truth come out, no matter what the cost. The interrogation in the library went on for hours. Regina watched the careful dance between Michael and the council members, each question laden with subtext and veiled threats. Harrison Powell, in particular, kept a predatory gaze fixed on the young Westbrook, as if looking for signs of weakness. "So you're saying you have no knowledge of your father's personal files?" Powell asked, his soft voice masking a threatening tone. "As I said before, I'm still getting to grips with the business since my return," Michael replied with studied calm. "My father's death was sudden, and there's a lot to be organized." Regina stood near the door, her hands clasped in front of her body in her usual posture of service, but her senses were on high alert. Through the library window, she noticed a second car arriving at the estate. This one didn't belong to the council. "Mr. Westbrook," she interrupted politely, "forgive me, but your 2 o'clock appointment has arrived." Michael checked his watch with perfect mock surprise. "Ah yes, gentlemen, I'm afraid we need to continue this discussion at another time. I have an important video conference with our investors in Tokyo." Powell stood up slowly, adjusting his Italian suit. "Of course, we don't want to interfere in current business. But this conversation isn't over, Michael. The board is concerned about some recent decisions." As soon as the board members had left, Michael collapsed into his chair, the facade of control momentarily crumbling. "Who's really here, Regina?" "Lauren," she replied, already moving to lock the library door. "And from what I can see, she's not alone." Minutes later, Lauren entered through the back door, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a determined posture. "Michael, Regina, this is Patricia Morrison from the Environmental Protection Agency." The atmosphere in the library changed instantly. Patricia Morrison carried a thick briefcase under her arm and an expression that mixed compassion and professional determination. "Mr. Westbrook," she began, "I've spent the last 15 years investigating cases of environmental contamination in the northeastern United States. Your mother, Caroline, was one of the first people to bring concrete evidence of Westbrook Industries' activities to my attention." Michael straightened up in his chair. "You knew my mother?" "We met secretly several times in the weeks before her death," Patricia confirmed, opening her briefcase. "In fact, she had an appointment with me for the day after her accident." Regina felt a shiver run down her spine. Over the years, she had put pieces of the puzzle together about Caroline's death. But hearing confirmation of her suspicions was different. "The council knows you're investigating," Michael informed her. "They've just left here after a fairly incisive interrogation." Lauren moved closer to the window, watching the council cars leaving the estate. "They've been trying to destroy evidence. We need to act quickly." "We already have warrants being prepared," Patricia revealed, "but we need more. Something that directly links the council not only to the environmental violations, but also to Caroline's death." Regina sniffed softly. "Maybe I can help with that." All eyes turned to her. Alexander didn't just keep documents in the attic. There are recordings. Conversations he secretly recorded during council meetings in the months after Caroline's death. Michael stared at her, surprised. "Why haven't you mentioned this before?" "Your father made me promise that I would only reveal it when absolutely necessary," Regina explained. "He knew that the recordings could be his only protection if the council ever turned against the family." Patricia Morrison was already on her feet. "We need those recordings immediately. With them and the documents Lauren already has, we can build a solid case." As Regina led the group up to the attic, Michael stopped briefly in the hallway, his eyes fixed on his mother's portrait. "We're gonna get justice, Mom," he murmured. Finally, in the attic, Regina revealed another secret compartment, this one hidden under loose floorboards. Inside, a metal box contained dozens of cassette tapes, each carefully dated and cataloged. Alexander started recording the meetings soon after he realized that the council was involved in Caroline's death, Regina explained, handing the tapes to Patricia. He never had the courage to use them, but he kept them as insurance. Lauren, who was examining the tapes, suddenly stopped at a specific one. "This one is from 3 days after Caroline's death." Michael picked up the tape with trembling hands. In his office, there was still an old stereo that could play it. The group descended in silence, each step echoing with the weight of the historic moment they were about to witness. As the tape began to play, filling the office with voices from the past, Regina observed Michael's face. There was pain there, but also a fierce determination that reminded her of both Caroline and Alexander. The Westbrook legacy was about to be redefined, not through modernization or superficial change, but through the truth and justice that Caroline had died trying to achieve. The cassette tape spun in the old stereo, filling the office with static before the first voices emerged. Michael, Lauren, Patricia, and Regina remained absolutely silent, as if they feared that even their breaths might obscure some crucial detail of the recording. "The problem has been solved." Harrison Powell's voice, 2 decades younger but still carrying that same predatory quality, was the first to be heard. "Caroline Westbrook will no longer be an inconvenience to our operations." Michael closed his eyes, his fingers squeezing the arms of the leather armchair until his knuckles turned white. Lauren placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "And Alexander?" Another voice asked. "William Rothschild, one of the oldest members of the board who had died 5 years ago." "Devastated, as expected," Powell replied with a slight tone of amusement. "But manageable. He knows he has as much to lose as any of us if the truth about the evictions comes out. Besides, there's the boy to consider." Regina watched Michael's face contort at the mention of himself being used as leverage against his father. Patricia Morrison was furiously making notes on her pad, occasionally consulting documents in her briefcase. The recording continued, revealing a web of conspiracies that went far beyond Caroline's death. Details of bribes to environmental inspectors, threats to employees who threatened to report wrongdoing, and an elaborate scheme to cover up the damage caused by toxic waste. That's more than enough, Patricia declared when the first tape finished. With this and the documents we already have, we can not only prosecute those responsible for Caroline's death, but also expose decades of environmental crimes. There's more, Regina said softly, taking another tape out of the box. This one is from 6 months later. Alexander started recording all the council meetings, especially when they discussed the cleanup projects, their attempts to cover up the environmental damage. Before they could put in the second tape, Lauren's phone vibrated. She checked the message and her face paled. Powell has called an emergency council meeting for tonight. They know something is going on. We need to act now, Patricia declared, reaching for her phone. I'll contact my team at the EPA and the federal prosecutor's office. With luck, we can have the warrants in a few hours. Michael finally stood up, walking over to the window overlooking the mansion's gardens. All these years, I blamed my father for not fighting harder for my mother's memory. I thought he'd simply moved on, focused on business. He fought his way, Regina replied, moving closer, collecting evidence, documenting everything. Alexander knew that one day you'd find out the truth, and you'd need that evidence. Lauren, who was organizing the documents with Patricia, suddenly stopped. Michael, there's something else you need to see. She held up a yellowed envelope, taken from one of the folders. It's a letter from your father, dated a week before he died. Michael took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found several pages written in Alexander's elegant handwriting. My son, by the time you find this letter, you will probably have discovered the truth about your mother. My cowardice in not confronting the council at the time cost her life, and that weight will accompany me until my last breath. But I want you to understand, every document I've kept, every recording I've made, every clean energy project I've started in recent years, it's all been part of a bigger plan. Caroline dreamed of a Westbrook Industries that would be a force for good, that would lead the change towards a more sustainable future. The investments in solar energy and clean technology that I have initiated are not just business. They're the beginning of the transformation that your mother always wanted to see. The board doesn't know it, but for the past 5 years, I've been secretly transferring funds to a foundation in Caroline's name. That foundation now owns significant stakes in renewable energy companies across the country. You'll find all the details in the safe behind your mother's portrait. The combination is her date of birth. The day Caroline said our family finally had a future worth fighting for. Forgive me for not being stronger when you needed it most. But know that every decision I've made since your mother's death has been with the thought of the day when you would be ready to complete the work she started. Love, Dad. The silence that followed the reading was interrupted by the sound of cars approaching on the boulevard. Lauren ran to the window. That's them. The council is coming back. Patricia was already storing documents in her briefcase. We need to protect this evidence. If they find out what we have... Regina, Michael called out, his voice carrying a new authority. You know every inch of this house. Where can we hide Patricia and these documents until the warrants arrive? Regina didn't hesitate. The old wine cellar. There's a secret passage that Alexander had built during the 1995 renovation. No one but me and Charles knows of its existence. Lauren, go with them, Michael ordered. I'll deal with the advice. Michael Lauren started to protest, but he interrupted her. I need to keep up appearances for a few more hours. Besides, a bitter smile crossed his lips. I think it's time I had a frank talk with Harrison Powell about the Westbrook legacy. Michael watched through the office window as the council cars parked in precise formation in front of the Westbrook mansion. Harrison Powell led the group, his posture emanating a confidence that Michael now recognized as arrogance cultivated by years of impunity. While Regina guided Patricia and Lauren to the safety of the secret cellar, Michael positioned himself behind his father's desk. Alexander's diary rested in the top drawer, along with a newly discovered letter, silent witnesses to the legacy he was about to defend. Charles quietly entered the office. They insist on an immediate meeting, sir. Mr. Powell mentions having information about recent irregularities. Send them to the meeting room on the second floor, Michael instructed, adjusting his tie. And Charles? Make sure no one moves around the mansion unsupervised. The butler nodded, understanding the subtext. As he made his way to the meeting room, Michael could feel the weight of the last 24 hours on his shoulders. The rebellious son who had returned determined to modernize everything had turned into the heir his mother had always hoped he would become. Harrison Powell and 4 other board members were already seated when Michael entered. The tension was palpable in the air-conditioned room, masked by corporate smiles and Italian ties. "Michael," Powell began, her tone falsely paternal, "we're concerned about some disturbing rumors. Apparently, you've been receiving some questionable visitors." "Interesting choice of words, Harrison," Michael replied, keeping his voice calm as he sat down at the head of the table. "Questionable like the accident that killed my mother?" The silence that followed was deafening. Powell kept his smile, but his eyes hardened. "Careful, boy. Your position as CEO may be hereditary, but the board still has the power to make your life challenging." "How did they make my father's life after my mother's death?" Michael opened a folder on the table, revealing copies of some documents they had discovered. "Or should I say, after a murder? That's absurd." One of the younger counselors protested, but Powell silenced him with a gesture. "Michael," Powell leaned forward, "your father understood that certain compromises were necessary for the greater good of the company. Westbrook Industries employs thousands of people. Some difficult decisions needed to be made." "Tough decisions?" Michael felt anger rising in his chest, but controlled it. "Like dumping toxic waste on entire communities? Like silencing people who were trying to do the right thing?" "Your mother was an idealist," Powell sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "She didn't understand the realities of the corporate world. Your father eventually understood that?" Michael allowed himself a small smile. "No, Harrison. My father never understood. He just got smarter than you." He pressed a button on his phone, and the recorded voice of Harrison Powell, 2 decades younger, filled the room. "The problem has been solved. Caroline Westbrook will no longer be an inconvenience to our operations." Powell's face lost all color. The other board members looked at each other nervously. "I have hours of these recordings," Michael continued. "My father has documented everything for the last 20 years. Every meeting, every decision, every threat. And that's just the beginning. You have no idea what you're doing," Powell hissed, his mask of civility finally falling. On the contrary, Michael stood up, resting his hands on the table. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing. The Environmental Protection Agency already has all the documents. The warrants are being issued as we speak. You're going to destroy everything your family has built," another advisor warned. "No," Michael replied firmly. "I'm going to rebuild it the right way. The way my mother always wanted." Powell also stood up, his face contorted with fury. "You're as naive as she was. Do you think you can just expose 2 decades of operations without consequences? There are other powerful people involved, Michael. People who won't hesitate to kill me like they killed my mother." Michael added, "It's too late, Harrison. If anything happens to me, all the evidence will automatically be sent to various media outlets and federal agencies." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the afternoon air. Through the window, Michael saw several EPA and FBI cars entering the gates of the estate. "Gentlemen," he announced, "I believe our meeting is over. I suggest you cooperate with the authorities. After all, the council has always prized discretion, hasn't it?" As federal agents stormed the meeting room, Michael watched Harrison Powell being handcuffed. The predator finally transformed into prey. In the corridor, he ran into Regina, who had returned after ensuring Lauren and Patricia's safety. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly. Michael nodded, feeling the weight of 20 years of lies finally beginning to dissipate. "The work is just beginning, Regina. We have a company to transform and a legacy to rebuild." Regina smiled, that smile that carried decades of wisdom and loyalty. "And this time, you are not alone in this mission." Through the windows of the Westbrook mansion, the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the garden, as if nature itself recognized that a new era was beginning. An era of truth, justice, and the realization of the dream that Caroline Westbrook had died trying to achieve. The morning after the arrest of the council members, the Westbrook mansion was buzzing with activity. Federal agents were methodically going through every room, documenting evidence and photographing decades of history that were now taking on a new perspective. Michael watched everything from the library, temporarily converted into an operations center. "The first preliminary reports are devastating," Lauren commented, entering the room with a pile of documents. "The EPA has identified at least 12 contamination sites that could be directly linked to Westbrook Industries operations." Michael nodded gravely, his eyes roaming over a digital map that showed the extent of the damage. Red dots flashed like open wounds along the East Coast, each representing a community affected by the company's environmental crimes. "Patricia said the first hearings start next week," Lauren continued, taking a seat next to him. "Harrison Powell is cooperating with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, he has a lot to say about the other executives involved." "Of course he does," Michael muttered, a bitter smile curving his lips. "Powell has always been a survivor. He built his career on knowing exactly when to switch sides." Regina entered silently, carrying a tray of fresh coffee. As she poured the cups, her experienced eyes noticed the exhaustion on Michael's features. "I found some more things in the attic that you should see," she said, placing an old box on the table. "These are projects that your mother was developing before the accident." Michael opened the box with reverent care. Inside, he found meticulously organized folders, each detailing a different vision for the future of Westbrook Industries. There were feasibility studies for converting factories into renewable energy centers, plans for environmental recovery programs, and even outlines for a foundation dedicated to environmental education. "She had it all planned out," Lauren observed, leafing through the documents. "Caroline wasn't just trying to expose the company's crimes. She wanted to completely transform it. And now we have the chance to realize that vision," Michael replied, a new determination in his voice. He stood up, walking over to the window that overlooked the mansion's gardens. "But first, we need to face the consequences of the past." As if in response to his words, Charles appeared at the door. "Sir, there's a delegation of Bedford residents here to see you. They represent the families affected by the incidents." Michael exchanged a meaningful glance with Lauren before nodding. "Use the main hall, Charles. It's time to start fixing things." The main hall, with its carved oak paneling and ancestral portraits, had never witnessed a gathering like this. Around 20 people, representing different generations of local families, occupied the chairs arranged in a semicircle. Their faces carried stories of unexplained illnesses, devalued properties, and lives altered by the silent contamination that had spread across their land. "My name is Michael Westbrook," he began, standing up in front of the group. "And before I say anything, I want to apologize for what my family and our company have done to you." "Apologies don't cure cancer," a woman in the front row declared, her voice shaking with emotion. "My daughter was only 12 when—" "No, apologies aren't enough," Michael agreed, his voice soft but firm. "That's why I'm here to propose something more concrete." He gestured to Lauren, who distributed folders among those present. Inside were details of an extensive environmental compensation and recovery program. Westbrook Industries would not only commit to completely cleaning up the affected areas, but would also establish a substantial fund to cover medical expenses and material losses for the families. "This is just the beginning," Michael continued. "We intend to transform Westbrook Industries into a model of environmental and social responsibility. And we want you to be part of that transformation." A murmur went through the room as people examined the documents. Regina, watching discreetly from the back of the room, noticed how Michael emanated the same compassionate presence as Caroline, combined with Alexander's pragmatic determination. "How can we trust you?" an elderly man asked, his voice carrying decades of mistrust. "How do we know this isn't just another corporate stunt?" Michael walked over to the portrait of his mother that dominated one of the walls of the hall. "Because I'm following the dream of someone who gave her life, trying to do the right thing. And because I'm not just asking you to trust me." He then introduced the members of the team he had assembled: environmental remediation experts, civil rights lawyers, and EPA representatives who would oversee the entire process. Lauren explained how transparency would be key at every stage. with regular reports and community participation in decisions. As the meeting progressed, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The initial mistrust gave way to cautious optimism. Questions about financial compensation evolved into discussions about future projects and opportunities for collaboration. Regina watched everything with a heart full of pride and hope. The Westbrook mansion, which had kept dark secrets for so long, was now becoming a center of transformation and healing. In her pocket, she still carried the key to the secret compartment in the attic, but for the first time in 20 years, she felt that perhaps she didn't need to hide anything anymore. The true Westbrook legacy was finally emerging from the shadows, not through superficial modernization or blind preservation of the past, but through a profound moral and structural transformation. In Michael, the rebellious son who had returned to change everything, was proving to be exactly the leader his mother had always known he could become. 2 weeks after the meeting with the affected families, Michael found himself back in his father's office, now transformed into an operations center for the largest environmental recovery project in Bedford's history. The walls, once covered in old books, now displayed detailed maps and graphs showing the extent of the damage caused by Westbrook Industries. The first results of the soil analysis are in, Lauren announced, entering the room with a stack of reports. It's worse than we imagined. The contamination has spread to the water table in 3 different locations. Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Regina noticed becoming more frequent with each new challenge that arose. How long will it take to decontaminate? The experts estimate between 5 and 7 years for a full recovery, Lauren replied, spreading the reports out on the table. And that's being optimistic. A soft knock on the door interrupted the discussion. Charles entered with his usual discretion. Sir, there's a call from the prison. Harrison Powell is requesting a private meeting. Michael exchanged a meaningful glance with Lauren. Powell had spent the last 2 weeks cooperating with the authorities, but had so far refused to speak directly to Michael. He claims to have information about your mother, Charles added softly. Information that doesn't appear on any recordings or documents. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Regina, who was organizing files in the corner of the room, stopped her movements, her eyes meeting Michael's with concern. I'll go over there, Michael decided, standing up. Lauren, continue with the analysis of the reports. Regina, I need you to find anything in my father's files that mentions meetings with Powell in the months leading up to my mother's death. The Westchester Federal Detention Center was a stark contrast to the elegance of the Westbrook mansion. Michael followed a guard through gray corridors to a private visiting room, where Harrison Powell was waiting, wearing an orange uniform that seemed grotesquely inappropriate for his normally impeccable bearing. Michael, Powell greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks for coming. No games, Harrison, Michael cut in, taking a seat. What do you know about my mother? Powell leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think you know the whole story, don't you? The recordings, the documents. But there are things your father never recorded. Things that happened before that last night. Go on, Michael ordered, keeping his voice controlled despite his racing heart. Caroline wasn't alone in her investigation, Powell revealed. There were others within the company helping her. People who also died in accidents over the following weeks. Michael felt his stomach turn. Names? Better than that. Powell smiled humorlessly. I have proof. I kept a complete file as collateral. All the names, dates, transactions. Your father wasn't the only paranoid keeping records. Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to understand the true extent of what you're up against. Powell leaned in even closer. It's not just a few corrupt executives, Michael. There are politicians, judges, business leaders, a whole network built up over decades. Michael studied the man in front of him, looking for signs of manipulation. And what do you want in exchange for this information? Protection, Powell replied simply. When these names come to light, a lot of powerful people will want silence. I want assurances that I won't end up like your mother. Back at the mansion, Michael found Lauren and Regina waiting in his study. The sun was setting through the old windows, casting long shadows over the scattered maps and reports. Powell is telling the truth, Lauren confirmed after hearing the report. We found references in the EPA files about other suspicious deaths in the same period. We've never been able to make the connections before. Regina approached with a yellowed folder. I found these in your father's files. They're newspaper clippings about industrial accidents between 1990 and 2000, all involving people who worked in departments related to environmental control. Michael examined the clippings, feeling the weight of the truth gathering like a storm on the horizon. How many lives were destroyed to keep these secrets? The question now is, what do we do with this information? Lauren asked softly. Michael walked over to the portrait of his mother, studying the gentle smile that hid a strength he was only now beginning to fully understand. We do what my mother would have done. We expose everything, no matter the cost. It will be dangerous, Regina warned, her voice laden with maternal concern. The truth always is, Michael replied, turning to face them. But we've kept secrets for too long in this house. The telephone on the table rang, startling everyone. Charles answered, and his expression changed subtly. Sir, it's Patricia Morrison from the EPA. They found something in the old factory records. Michael picked up the phone, listening intently as Patricia explained about a series of newly discovered documents in a dead archive. When he hung up, his face was pale. What is it? Lauren asked, moving closer. They found my mother's original report, Michael replied, his voice almost a whisper. The one she was about to make public the night she died. And there are names, Lauren. Names of people who are still in power today. Regina watched the young man who had grown up under her care, seeing in him now not just traces of Caroline and Alexander, but something entirely new, a determination forged by truth and tempered by justice. The storm to come will be strong, she commented softly. Then we'd better start building shelters, Michael replied, already reaching for his phone to make some calls. It would be a long night, but for the first time in 20 years, the Westbrook secrets would finally see the light of day. The discovery of Caroline's original report had triggered a series of events that turned the Westbrook mansion into an unlikely center of investigation. Federal agents, environmental lawyers, and investigative journalists circulated through the historic corridors, each following different threads of a plot that was proving more complex by the day. Michael was leaning over a makeshift desk in the old ballroom, surrounded by documents and computer screens. Lauren was coordinating a team of analysts who were cross-referencing data from Powell's files with records found by the EPA. The sound of typing fingers and concentrated murmurs filled the space, once reserved for high society waltzes and celebrations. We found 3 more connections, Lauren announced, approaching with a folder. 2 federal judges and a state senator. All received substantial payments through shell foundations in the months leading up to your mother's death. Regina entered silently, carrying a tray of fresh coffee. Her experienced eyes noticed the deep dark circles under Michael's eyes, the rolled-up sleeves of his dress shirt, revealing the fatigue of sleepless nights. The governor is asking for a private meeting, Charles informed him, materializing in the doorway with his usual discretion. Apparently, he's concerned about the economic implications of the investigation. Michael let out a humorless laugh. Worried about his own skin, you mean? His name appears on 3 different documents, signing fraudulent environmental authorizations. Patricia Morrison, who had set up a temporary office in the library, joined the group with new information. The toxicological analysis of the contaminated sites is complete. We found chemical components that were not listed in any official Westbrook Industries records. They were running a parallel operation, Lauren concluded, connecting the dots. The official documents showed one thing, but the reality was much worse. Caroline found out about this, Regina added softly, removing a worn notebook from her apron. I found this hidden in an old box in the attic. It's her personal notes from the months before the accident. Michael took the notebook reverently, his fingers tracing his mother's elegant handwriting. The pages were filled with detailed observations, phone numbers and codes that she had used to document her findings without attracting attention. She knew she was being watched, he muttered, flipping through the pages. There are references in here to a plan B in case anything happened to her. Lauren leaned over the notebook with him. Look at this. She mentions a safe deposit box at a bank in Manhattan. Account number, password. It's all here. Charles, Michael called out, his voice gaining urgency. "Get the car ready." "Lauren, you're coming with me." "Patricia, keep coordinating the analysis of the documents here." "Regina, I'll keep everything under control," she added with an understanding smile. The bank in Manhattan was an imposing Art Deco building in the heart of the financial district. Michael and Lauren were ushered into a private room where an elderly manager awaited them with a grave expression. "Mr. Westbrook," the manager greeted formally, "this safe has not been accessed in 20 years. Your mother left specific instructions about who could open it and when. The contents of the safe were more revealing than anyone could have imagined. As well as incriminating documents, there was a USB stick, advanced technology for the time, and a letter addressed to Michael. She knew this would happen," Lauren whispered as Michael read the letter, his hands trembling slightly. She prepared all this as a guarantee. Back at the mansion, the team gathered in the office to analyze the new findings. The USB stick contained a real bombshell. Videos of secret meetings, illegal bank transfers, and a complete list of everyone involved in the environmental contamination scheme. "This changes everything," Patricia declared, examining the files. "With this evidence, we can not only prosecute those directly responsible but dismantle the entire network of corruption." Michael remained silent for a long moment, looking at the portrait of his mother on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unwavering determination. "Tomorrow, we're holding a press conference here at the mansion. It's time for the Westbrook legacy to mean something other than power and corruption." Regina, who was watching the scene from the doorway, felt tears forming in her eyes. For the first time in 20 years, the ghosts that haunted the corridors of the Westbrook mansion were beginning to find peace. The truth, as Caroline had always believed, was finally coming to light. The press conference at the Westbrook mansion attracted an unprecedented crowd. Journalists from all over the country crowded into the main hall. Their cameras and microphones pointed at the makeshift podium where Michael was preparing to make the announcement that would change his family's legacy forever. Regina watched from the side of the hall, her hands clasped tightly together as she recalled all the parties and events that the same space had witnessed over the years. Now, under the lights of the cameras, the mansion seemed stripped of its secrets, exposed in its rawest truth. "We're ready," Lauren announced softly, approaching Michael with the last documents organized. Patricia Morrison from the EPA was positioned strategically near the podium, representing official support for the investigation. Michael adjusted his tie one last time, his eyes finding the portrait of his mother that dominated the main wall. The murmur of the press subsided when he finally took his position. "Good morning," he began, his firm voice echoing through the hall. 20 years ago, my mother, Caroline Westbrook, was killed for uncovering a truth that threatened to expose decades of environmental and corporate crime. Today, I am here to complete the work she began." A heavy silence fell over the audience as Michael methodically detailed his findings. The network of corruption, the environmental damage, the covered-up deaths. The screens behind him displayed documents, graphs, and evidence that his mother had painstakingly collected. "Westbrook Industries will no longer be synonymous with power at the expense of human life," he declared. "We are handing over all the evidence to the federal authorities and beginning the largest environmental recovery project in the history of the country." Questions exploded from the audience like gunshots. Each reporter tried to capture a different angle of the story. Michael answered with a calm that Regina recognized from Caroline. The same serene determination in the face of adversity. "Mr. Westbrook," one journalist chimed in, "sources indicate that members of the current government are implicated. How do you intend to deal with the inevitable political retaliation?" "The same way my mother would," Michael replied, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "With truth and transparency. Every document we reveal today is simultaneously being made available online to the public. The era of Westbrook secrets is over." Lauren, monitoring the reactions on social media via her tablet, noticed how the hashtag Westbrook Files was quickly becoming a trending topic. "It's working," she whispered to Regina. "The story is spreading faster than they can control." As the press conference continued, Charles discreetly approached Regina. "There's a situation that requires attention," he murmured. Harrison Powell is requesting to make a statement via video conference from prison. Regina felt her stomach turn. He wasn't in the script. No, Charles agreed. But he insists he has something important to add. Something about his last conversation with Caroline. The news reached Michael through discreet signals from the team. Without missing a beat, he made a small gesture of agreement. Minutes later, Harrison Powell's face appeared on the screens in the hall, the orange prison uniform contrasting drastically with his former image of power. "I want to make a public confession," Powell began, his voice carrying a weight that surprised everyone. "The night Caroline Westbrook died, she came to me with an offer. She had enough evidence to destroy me, but she was willing to give me a chance to do the right thing." The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Michael gripped the edge of the podium so tightly that his fingers went white. "I refused," Powell continued. "And over the next 2 decades, I watched Alexander try to redeem himself through secret environmental projects, while I continued to accumulate power at the expense of more lives. Today, I see Caroline's son completing the circle that began that night, and I realize that she was right. She always was." Powell's confession added a new dimension to the narrative that was already dominating the headlines. In the hours following the press conference, more people began to come forward. Former employees, relatives of other victims, each bringing their own pieces to the puzzle of the truth. Regina found Michael later in his office, exhausted but resolute. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly, pouring him a cup of tea. "This is just the beginning," he replied, watching through the window as the last journalists left the estate. "Transforming the Westbrook legacy will take more than a press conference. But you're not alone in this mission," Lauren added, entering the room with new reports. "The first responses from the affected communities are positive. They want to be part of the recovery process." Michael nodded, picking up a photo of his mother from the desk. Caroline smiled at the image, her eyes shining with the same determination that now guided her son. "Tomorrow we start the real work," he declared. "The Westbrook mansion will be transformed into an environmental research center, just as my mother always dreamed." Regina smiled, remembering the countless times Caroline had shared this vision with her. The truth had finally found its way into the light, and with it, the chance for redemption that 3 generations of Westbrookers had sought. A week after the historic press conference, the Westbrook mansion pulsed with a different energy. What had once been a symbol of power and secrecy had been transformed into a meticulously organized construction site, with teams of environmental restoration experts occupying every available space. Michael watched from his office window as trucks carrying state-of-the-art equipment drove through the gates of the estate. The temporary laboratory installed in the old ballroom was already in full operation, analyzing soil and water samples from the affected areas. "The first results from the experimental treatment in Bedford are promising," Lauren announced, entering the office with a folder of reports. "The new bioremediation technology is working better than expected." "Caroline would have loved to see this," Regina commented softly, adjusting the curtains to let in more natural light. "She always said that science would be our salvation." Michael nodded, picking up one of the reports. The photo of his mother on the desk seemed to smile approvingly as he examined the preliminary data. "How are the families in a pilot program?" "Adapting well," Lauren replied. "The health center we set up in the old factory has already seen more than 200 people. Dr. Maxwell says the treatments are showing positive results." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Charles entered with his characteristic discretion, carrying an official envelope. "Urgent correspondence from the Department of Justice, sir." Michael opened the envelope with studied care, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. Lauren and Regina watched his expression change subtly. "The governor has accepted the deal," he announced, a slight smile forming on his lips. "He's going to resign from office and testify against the others involved in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Another domino falling," Lauren commented, moving closer to read the document. "That should speed up the investigations in the other states." Regina moved silently around the office, organizing papers and adjusting objects with the familiarity of decades of service. Her experienced eyes noticed how Michael seemed lighter, as if each truth revealed removed a weight from his shoulders. "Patricia called earlier," she mentioned casually. The EPA wants to use the mansion as a model for a new national environmental recovery program. Something about turning symbols of corporate power into centers of positive change. Michael stood up, walking over to the window overlooking the gardens. On the lawn below, a team of scientists were collecting soil samples, part of the extensive study to ensure that the Westbrook estate was also completely decontaminated. "I received an interesting letter yesterday," he said, his voice soft but firm. "From the university where my mother studied. They want to set up a scholarship in her name, focused on environmental research and social justice." Lauren smiled, moving closer to him. Her legacy is growing in ways she could never have imagined. "Actually, she did," Regina interjected, pulling a worn notebook from her apron. "I found this morning, in a box we hadn't looked through yet. It's her plans for the Caroline Westbrook Foundation." Michael took the notebook reverently, his fingers tracing his mother's elegant handwriting. The pages were filled with ambitious visions for educational programs, research centers, and community initiatives. "She wasn't just trying to expose the truth," he murmured, flipping through the pages. "She was building a plan for the future. And now you can do it," Lauren added softly. A sudden commotion in the garden attracted their attention. Through the window, they saw a group of children from the local community being guided by one of the scientists, all wearing small white lab coats and carrying soil test kits. "The educational program is already up and running," Regina explained, noticing Michael's questioning look. "Dr. Stevens came up with the idea of involving local schools in the environmental monitoring process. The children loved it, turning the new generation into guardians of the environment," Lauren smiled. "Caroline would have approved." Michael watched the scene for a moment, his mind processing how each small change connected to a bigger picture of transformation. The phone on his desk rang, bringing more news. Harrison Powell had agreed to record a full deposition, detailing 20 years of corporate and environmental crimes. "You know what's ironic?" he commented, hanging up the phone. "When I came back, I wanted to modernize everything, erase the past. Now I understand that real progress comes from facing our history and learning from it." Regina smiled, remembering the rebellious young man who had returned to the mansion, determined to change everything. "Sometimes we need to dig deep into the past to build a better future." "And speaking of digging," Lauren interrupted, checking her tablet, "the geology team has just confirmed that we can start phase 2 of the decontamination project. They want your approval to start tomorrow." Michael nodded, already moving to review the new reports. The Westbrook Mansion, once a symbol of power and secrets, was turning into a beacon of hope and change. The shadows of the past were still present, but now they served as a reminder of the path not to be followed, while a new legacy was built on the foundations of truth and redemption. 6 months after the transformation of the Westbrook Mansion into an environmental research center, Michael watched the sunset through the windows of the library, now converted into a conference room. The walls once covered in old books displayed interactive digital maps, showing the progress of the recovery projects in real time. "The latest results are impressive," Lauren commented, entering the room with a stack of fresh reports. "The bioremediation technology developed here is already being implemented in 3 other states. The EPA is calling it the Westbrook model." Michael smiled, remembering how his mother used to say that real change started with small actions. The laboratory housed in the old ballroom had become a center of excellence in environmental research, attracting scientists from all over the country. "Harrison Powell will be released tomorrow," Regina announced softly, entering with afternoon tea, a tradition she kept up even with all the changes at the mansion. His testimony led to the conviction of 12 executives and 3 high-ranking politicians. "And most importantly," Lauren added, "it helped identify all the areas affected by the contamination. The cleanup teams have already completed 60% of the planned work." Michael walked over to his mother's portrait, now surrounded by photographs of the environmental recovery work. "I got an interesting call today," he commented. "Yale University wants to establish a partnership. They want to use our structure for a graduate program in sustainable environmental management." Regina smiled, remembering the countless times Caroline had dreamed of turning the mansion into an education center. Her mother always said that knowledge was the key to real change. A group of children passed by the window, all wearing miniature white lab coats and carrying soil testing equipment. The educational program, started months ago, had grown exponentially, with schools all over the state taking part in environmental monitoring projects. Dr. Stevens asked to expand the junior lab, Lauren mentioned, watching the children. Apparently, 3 of our little scientists have already identified patterns of contamination that we had missed. Approve the expansion, Michael replied immediately, and see if we can implement similar programs in the other affected communities. Charles entered discreetly, carrying an old briefcase. We found this during the renovation of the West Wing, sir. It appears to be your grandmother's personal diary. Michael picked up the diary carefully. The yellowed pages revealed that the Westbrook's environmental awareness hadn't started with Caroline. His grandmother had already expressed concern about the family's industrial methods decades earlier. It's as if each generation has tried, in its own way, to change the course of things, he reflected, leafing through the delicate pages. But you were the first to really succeed, Regina observed gently. A movement in the garden caught her eye. Patricia Morrison from the EPA had arrived for the monthly evaluation meeting, accompanied by a team of international experts. The Westbrook Environmental Recovery Program is being studied by the UN, Lauren explained, checking her tablet. They want to use our model as a basis for similar projects in other countries. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight and honor of this recognition. Let's welcome them to the garden, he decided. I want them to see not just the results, but the process in action. The mansion's garden, once a symbol of aristocratic opulence, had been transformed into a living laboratory of environmental recovery. Experimental beds tested different methods of natural decontamination, while monitoring stations collected data in real time. Mr. Westbrook, Patricia greeted him warmly. Your latest reports have caused quite a stir in Washington. Congress is considering new legislation based on our findings here. The meeting that followed was held outdoors, with the experts walking between projects while discussing results and possibilities. Michael watched with pride as each area of the property told a different story of recovery and renovation. Your mother would be proud, Lauren whispered, standing next to him as the experts examined a new water filtration system. Not just proud, Regina added, approaching with her characteristic discretion. She'd be planning the next steps. Michael smiled, knowing that they were both right. The work they had started there was only the beginning. The Westbrook mansion, once a symbol of power and secrets, had become a beacon of hope and change. When the sun finally set that day, casting golden shadows over the estate, Michael stayed in the garden after everyone had gone. The air was clean, carrying the scent of healthy earth and growing plants, a living testament to the power of truth and transformation. Regina found him there, contemplating the twilight. Charles has prepared dinner, she announced softly. Lauren is organizing the documents for tomorrow's presentation to Congress. You know, Regina, Michael commented, without taking his eyes off the horizon. When I came back, I thought that modernizing meant erasing the past. Now I understand that real progress comes from honoring our history while building a better future. Regina smiled, her heart full of pride for the man he had become. The Westbrook mansion still stood, as majestic as ever, but its grandeur now came not from the power it represented, but from the lives it helped transform. The Westbrook legacy had finally found its true purpose, not in secrets and power, but in the search for truth and dedication to the common good. And as the lights in the lab continued to burn into the night, illuminating the path to a cleaner and fairer future, Regina knew that this was just the first page of a new chapter in the family's history. A chapter written not with ink, but with actions that would echo for generations.